Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Harnessing Empathy and Compassion to Create a Peaceful Future for All. Welcome to our in-person as well as our virtual audience. My name is Kehkasha. I am the founder president of Green Hope Foundation, and I am truly delighted to be your moderator for this session today that is happening on the sides of the UN Summit of the Future as well as during NYC Climate Week. Now, at the highest levels of decision making, we often hear a lot about the problems that are going on in the world, multiple intersecting challenges that we are being faced with, whether that is climate change, whether that's the threat of nuclear weapons, whether that's the health crisis, socioeconomic crises ranging from gender inequality, racial inequality, economic downturn, war. So we're seeing all of these intersecting crises being discussed, but very rarely do we actually hear about the emotion, the feelings, the empathy that it makes up the human existence in these spaces. And that lack of empathy, or rather in this case, the apathy, is what a lot of us as grassroots actors often see as the biggest challenge, because that lack of human connection is often what leads us to these areas of work where we see all of these challenges that manifest themselves in so many terrible, terrible ways. In my own line of work, whether that is working to build schools that are solar powered to provide children with access to education, or whether that is building water farms to provide access to clean drinking water, or even to address the psychological stress of climate change put upon women and girls by building solar streetlights. For all of those actions that we take, there is one kind of common aspect, and that is the empathetic aspect, the empathy and the compassion for people and planet. And when we go to these spaces where supposedly solutions are discussed, we find that empathy and compassion sorely lacking. And so today's panel is really about understanding the human connection to these challenges and understanding that there needs to be empathy for people and planet if we are to achieve in any sort of way Agenda 2030, any of the sustainability targets, or just a sustainable world at large. We have a very, very eminent group of speakers with us today who would be able to shed light on this topic from their lived experiences, people who have been working in the space for a really long time and whose work centers empathy and compassion to create that more peaceful future where no one is left behind and everyone has a life of dignity. And so I am truly delighted to welcome all of our speakers today. We have Nitin Najmera, who is the chair of the Board of Trustees of the Parliament of the World's Religions. I too am a trustee of the Parliament, so great to have Nitin here. We have Hawa Diallo, who is co-founder and director of the IBTK Foundation. She was supposed to be here in person, but now she is supposed to join us virtually, but has not connected yet. So hopefully her Wi-Fi gets better. We have Beth Billisman, who is the representative to the United Nations for the Loreto community. Welcome. We have Christine Leonardo, who is Program Officer, Religions for Peace International. Welcome. And we have Steve Chu, who from the Buddhist Tzu Chi Foundation, representative at the United Nations. Welcome. And this event is being co-organized by the Buddhist Tzu Chi Foundation, Parliament of the World's Religions, and Green Hope Foundation. So really, really happy to have all of us gathered here today to discuss this topic that is really of critical importance, because without the human connection, without the empathy and the compassion for people and planet, we cannot achieve any kind of peaceful future. So without any further ado, I would like to hand it over to our panelists to really ponder on this topic and share their insights. And the first round that I'd really like to hear from you, how have you seen empathy in action manifest in your work? Like, how has that been? What are the lessons learned? And how do you feel that stakeholders can really cultivate their own empathy and compassion to create a more peaceful society, a more sustainable future for all? So, Nathan, why don't we start with you?
Good afternoon, everybody. What a pleasure and an honor to be here with such an august group. And talking about empathy, the core of human civilization, right? It is the very fundamental emotion that a human being should have with one other person or with every element of life on the earth. I come from a Jain tradition of faith, and in Jain tradition, every life is sacred, every life needs to be respected, and every life needs to be treated exactly the way you need to be treated. So if you don't want to be harmed, you don't want to be yelled at, you don't want to be shouted at, you don't want to be told something that's false, you don't do the same to other, right? So empathy in action for me has always been an effort to understand the other person, to understand the perspectives, their emotions, their feelings. What are they bringing to the table at the time of discussion? Many times, what we know as hidden agendas, it is these hidden agendas that need to be brought forward, because unless until these hidden agendas are known, we cannot work on solutioning them and finding the answers. But to get to those hidden agendas, you cannot have an hidden agenda of your own, right? Trying to like push that person to a belittling position or anything. And you have to act as if an equal and ask what is going on? How can we help? Where is there a difference of purpose and why are we not coming together? And that communication has been key in my stories throughout, where I try to reach out, right? I've been criticized by a lot of people to be always on the fence, right? And I believe to be on the fence helps me to reach out on the other side faster. Because if I've already taken a side and if I'm on one side, then getting on the other side becomes many times difficult. So empathy for me has to be on living on that borderline edge, trying to understand the other perspective and trying to get to other person to understand this side's perspective, and bridging both those gaps is where my stories come from, where my theory comes from. And it has been, I'm blessed to have people who have understood this. And from the Jain principles of perspectives and anekantwad, we have tried to bring that together and try to understand the whole elephant in the blind man and the elephant story, and not just a part of the elephant. And that's how empathy has worked for me. What has worked is trying to understand the other person. What has not worked is closed doors where people are closed. They don't want to open up. They don't know why you have this need for being kind or telling people everything is good. So people judge you, people question your intentions. And to break through those barriers sometimes takes time. But once they open up, it's a beautiful world out there. Thank you.
I say thank you very much, Nathan, for sharing that. And I love how you said that sometimes being on the fence is it's like people are like, oh, why would you be on the fence? But it's really about reaching out to everyone, hearing everyone's perspectives, ensuring that it's not about this side is better than the other one. It's just about ensuring that we hear everyone's perspectives. And that is how we empathize with others instead of alienating someone because, well, their views don't match your own, or you think their views don't match your own, when in fact they might. It's just put forward in a different way. So thank you very much for sharing that. Beth, over to you.
Thank you very much, Kekashan. Thank you for inviting me to be here. Thank you to Suchi for hosting. Actually, when I think of compassion in action, the first thing that comes to mind is this Suchi Center and the work that has come to fruition from Dharma Master Cheng Yen. This space, this place, the design, the layout, the welcome that I receive every time I come here, place matters and space matters. And so thank you for being compassion in action here at Suchi. So as I was introduced, my name is Beth Blissman, or Bliss Woman, or Bliss Person, if you're tremendously inclusive. And I have the privilege, true privilege of serving as the United Nations representative of not one now, but 3 different organizations of Catholic sisters. The Loreto community based in Kentucky here in the US, although we have sisters in Pakistan as well. And the Sisters of Charity of the Blessed Virgin Mary of Dubuque, Iowa, based, of course, in Dubuque, Iowa. They do mainly educational work. And now Sisters Rising Worldwide, which is a global organization supporting all the sisters all around the world with an intriguing technology platform, which is kind of a new thing for sisters, but very, very important and interesting way for both sisters to network and then people to learn about the work of the sisters and fund it directly if they so desire. So an exciting groups to hang out with. But for me, when I think of the importance of empathy and compassion, and many people, of course, associate and affiliate those feelings with Catholic sisters, who are very often the ones who are first to respond, right? Who are living at the grassroots among the people in need, living with the poorest of the poor, ministering to them and with them. And so that is a common connection. But I think it's also very, very important for us to keep in mind the importance of empathy and compassion when it comes to self-care. That's something we, within the Catholic tradition, I'll just say, we haven't always done the best with, right? So it's very important to practice self-care in order to be able to do the work over the long haul. The work we're doing, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint, even though we have sprint moments like the Summit of the Future. Lots of sprinty moments here at the UN. But self-care is one thing I wanted to talk about because I think that's incredibly important. And perhaps that's because I need to do a better job of it myself. But as we cross generations, that's also something I would say to younger activists, keep yourselves nourished in all the different ways that you need to keep yourselves nourished in order to be able to do the work over the long haul. Another thing is to work in an interfaith setting, in addition to an intergenerational setting. I just love going to the Parliament of the World's Religions last year. That was fabulous. Thank you for that opportunity. The more dialogue we can have across difference, the better. And when we look at the ecosystems around us, when we look at the world, we see the most biodiversity along the edges, whether it be the edge between a forest and a stream or a field and a forest, right? The most biodiversity is along the edges. So for me, I always look for the edges. Where are the edges in whatever setting I'm in? And I like to go hang out there and talk with the people on the margins and try and open my heart and be open to a surprising new connection, right? And surprising conversations. And the other thing I wanted to note in terms of listening, which to me is a key part of both empathy and compassion, it's been a great way for me to broaden my worldview, to think about the importance of listening beyond the human. I mean, listening to other humans is incredibly important, but we are in the season of creation, which goes from September 1st to October 4th within the Christian tradition. It ends on the feast of St. Francis. And for me, it's been a great learning and opening up of my own tradition to learn about the medieval mystics and the earth mystics that we have within the Christian tradition. That's been incredibly important. And the importance, especially now, as we're facing climate crises in terms of biodiversity, pollution, plastic pollution, air pollution, rising water levels, environmental justice. I mean, the list goes on, right? So it's incredibly important, I think, to also listen to other species of life and listen to Earth itself as we practice empathy and compassion. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Beth, for sharing your views on this topic. Absolutely. I think listening, yes, forms a very, very important part of learning from other people and not just like putting your own views across. But I just wanted to quickly share, actually, you said that, listening to the non-human as well. Wanted to link that with the self-care that you so rightly spoke about. We have our farm in Canada. Green Hope has a farm there, and we're harvesting vegetables now, actually. So we have like huge zucchinis, beets, all of these different vegetables. And for me, it's just so wonderful to be able to, like, I feel like I'm listening to what the earth has to tell us with the vegetables that are growing there, with the wind that's blowing. And that for me is like, and for so many of our members and the children we work with, a form of self-care to be able to heal with nature, but also to listen to what nature has to tell us. As you were speaking, that was the first thing that came into my mind. So thank you very much for sharing how self-care, listening, all of that, and listening to the non-human plays a really important role in empathy and compassion. So thank you. And I shall now hand it over to Christine.
Thank you so much, Kekasha, and I'm very grateful to be part of this important discussion. As I was introduced, I am a program officer at Religions for Peace, and at Religions for Peace, we believe that empathy and compassion are not just values, but essential tools for positive and transformative action. With over a 50-year legacy and experience of advancing multi-religious collaboration for the common good, we work across over 90 countries to bring together diverse religious and also faith leaders and communities, including women and youth, to work together in addressing the most pressing global challenges. And through this work, we have witnessed firsthand how empathy can catalyze peace building and social healing and cohesion. In my experience, one of the most profound manifestations of empathy is our work with communities that are affected and most threatened by the climate and ecological crises. In regions where climate change has intensified poverty and displacement, we have brought together diverse religious and faith and Indigenous leaders to foster dialogue and cooperation. As a lead implementing partner of the Interfaith Rainforest Initiative, of which I have the privilege of coordinating, we have united and also equipped religious and Indigenous leaders to protect the world's rainforests, and most importantly, protect the rights of Indigenous leaders who serve as its guardians, including mobilizing and advocating at critical points in national policymaking. And this initiative has demonstrated that it's very important not only to listen and witness and immerse yourself in the pain and suffering of the most vulnerable, but also take concrete actions to preserve the future for both the people and the planet. It shows us that empathy, when harnessed, is a powerful driver for sustainable development and all of the goals that we are all working towards currently. And a key lesson from this work is that empathy is strengthened by relationships. The deeper that we connect with others across cultures, faiths, regions, and generations, the more our empathy grows. Religions for Peace is built on the understanding that when we listen, as Beth kindly mentioned, to the stories of those impacted by injustice, we begin to see the world from their perspective. We begin to see our interconnectedness, and with that, our responsibility to act on behalf of the vulnerable and the voiceless. At Religions for Peace, we try to promote a vision of sacred shared flourishing, which recognizes that personal flourishing is intrinsically linked to the flourishing of others. In this sense, empathy transforms into solidarity, and from that solidarity, we can work together to address the most pressing challenges. A key example is the Religions for Peace Beyond War and Towards Reconciliation multi-religious peace roundtables, which have brought together diverse religious leaders from otherwise warring countries to engage in dialogue, exchange reflections on humanitarian emergencies that they face in their respective contexts, and unite in a common vision of peace that upholds the sanctity of human life, human rights, and human dignity. In February, the second Tokyo Peace Roundtable brought together diverse religious leaders from across the globe, including, and we were very honored, from Israel and Palestine and Ukraine and Russia, who together called for a ceasefire, which was a remarkable and momentous step, and also committed together to work together as bridge builders and peacemakers in ensuring that no one is left behind in common action to address severe violence, displacement, and other severe human rights violations across the globe. And as for how stakeholders can cultivate and enhance their own empathy and compassion, it starts with intentionally creating safe spaces for dialogue, whether in local communities or in the global stage, creating environments where diverse voices are heard and differences are respected is vital. Religions for Peace does this through our interreligious councils across the globe, including through the recently held Training of the Trainers in Liberia and Zimbabwe on sustainable processes for reconciliation, healing, and restorative processes, all underpinned by mindful and psychological practices for forgiveness through a multi-religious lens. And another way that stakeholders can enhance empathy is common action. Compassion comes alive when we serve others. As one of the unique capacities that we bring to the table, faith actors have long embodied this truth, whether it's providing humanitarian aid or advocating for human rights. Collaboration across faiths, regions, cultures, generations shifts our focus from self-interest to the well-being and flourishing of others, thus reinforcing the values of empathy and compassion at a practical level. And ultimately, the key to creating a peaceful future lies in approaching our global challenges from a values-based lens. When empathy and compassion are integrated into our decision-making, whether in policy, advocacy, or community action, our responses become more humane, inclusive, and effective and sustainable. This is particularly important as we all currently face intersecting crises that threaten the most vulnerable members of our communities. Our efforts must thus be guided by the principle that no one should be left behind as we promote shared human flourishing. Thank you.
Thank you. Amazing. Thank you very much, Christine, for sharing your views, for highlighting the very important aspect, once again, of listening, but also as grassroots acts, as a fellow grassroots actor, I was like, yes, that's exactly what we see on the ground as well, the importance of really understanding what is going on at the ground level, the importance of the values-based approach, as you said, because honestly, when we're growing up, whether it's our religion, whether it's traditions, we do have these values that are instilled in us, but somehow as we grow older, we go out into the world, we forget that, and we go into all sorts of terrible things as we're seeing in the world right now. But making sure that we connect to that, the values, the very human values of empathy and compassion and love for each other, for planet, is just so very important. And that it's just so critical to achieve a peaceful world where no one's left behind. So thank you very much for sharing your views. Steve, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Kaikasha. And I'm so grateful we're having this conversation. I think as we work to speak to how we put empathy and compassion into action, I think it's so rare to have a more inner conversation, right? Oftentimes we look to address the manifestations of our actions and our choices, and to be in a space where we're reflecting on what drives us to make those choices, what drives us to care, what drives us to have apathy, I think is what's needed in this moment as we're thinking about creating a better future, right? Because we arrive in this present moment because of a sort of mindlessness, right? And to come in to say we need mindfulness, and how do we manifest that? How is that showing up in our own work? I think is a very exciting question. Yeah. So I'm Steve. I serve with Buddhist Tzu Chi Foundation as the representative to the United Nations. And I think in our name itself, Tzu translates to compassion, and Ji translates into relief. And so like those two words put together really are about putting compassion into action. And in terms of how it shows up, we work across all 17 sustainable development goals in a very holistic way. But I lifted up three things in just hearing everyone's reflections that I wanted to quickly touch on. The first being like this question of how we get people to care, right? Because so oftentimes to have empathy requires us to see others, whether that's human, non-human, sentient beings, as those deserving of love and care. Right. And we find ourselves in a very polarized world, in difficult and like challenging ideological moments. And I think the thing that allows for us to connect, the thing that allows for care to be expressed is love. Right. And it's not just love in language, but love through action. Right. And how does that love manifest for us is through service. Right. And so empathy and compassion in found through service as a vehicle allows for us to connect to something much deeper. And I think in that service, as we get to serve others, we begin to know their suffering, right? And we can't empathize unless we know their suffering. And to be able to serve them requires like a population willing to have that like love, right? So we work to cultivate that. But the second piece that I think a lesson that we've deeply learned over the years from the onset has been that to care, to have compassion, and to have empathy burns you out, right? There's compassion fatigue. There's like this deep connection to those who are suffering. But as you see their suffering and how grand it is and how tied it is to systemic issues, oftentimes, if you aren't equipped with faith, if you aren't equipped with proper tools to help you like reconcile that within yourself, your external work becomes very filled with turmoil, right? So one thing that I think we've learned as Tzu Chi is the critical importance of caring for those who care, right? Christine spoke about training the trainers. Let's talk about caring the carers, right? Like that sense of how do we ensure that those who are the front lines helping the most vulnerable are also having the accessibility to have healing, to have space of reflection, of like rest and reprieve, so that they may bravely step back into that space. And that's been a critical role of, we have in Chinese, we call this phrase 法亲关怀, which is to care for our Dharma family, right? And it's to say that anyone who steps into our community to serve, you have your own needs, and we must care for those needs as well, whether that's food, shelter, companionship, reflection. All of these pieces, I think, are important to the flourishing of the individual so they can serve for the flourishing of the community, right? So to have empathy, to have compassion requires this like interconnected structure that we have to like build and facilitate, right? And in its absence, I think empathy and compassion only become abstract ideas rather than things we can really act on. And the final piece I wanted to speak to is really like loneliness, in that like I think we're seeing an epidemic of loneliness right now. And in that, we're seeing an inwardness towards like selfishness, right? In that, like in this moment, we don't necessarily see a trend towards communalism. We see this like shrinking of the heart, right? And I think because a lot of these basic needs of humanity haven't been addressed and met, we find ourselves in this at this juncture, right? And so as humanitarian aid organizations, as faith-based organizations, I think it's our role to kind of step in and fill that gap in the temporary and really advocate for systemic solutions that allow for the flourishing of the individual so that we can really reach that collective. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Steve, for sharing that. You know, the one thing that really stood out to me when you said that when you're working on the ground, like actually going out there and working in the communities, when you're doing the service, like that's probably the best way to understand what is going on at the ground level. And, you know, as someone who works within these communities and for a really long time, like that's something I will absolutely stand by that statement as well, because I remember when we'd gone into rural Cambodia to implement education programs for the children there, and we were speaking with them, working with them, imparting our education and little programs. And as we were speaking with them, we realized that the main aspect that was needed was access to water, clean drinking water. And that was not something that was told to us. It was not something that someone else from the outside said to us, but working with them, understanding, spending time with them and understanding what their needs were, like that was what we were able to get out of that. And the solar water farm that I just mentioned in my introductory remarks, that was something that we installed there to ensure that they actually had that access to clean drinking water. It wasn't something that they were saying out loud, but it was something that working with them and their members, being from the community, understanding, spending time with them, there was the service aspect that allowed us to be able to address that particular challenge. So I'm really glad you spoke about that very important part. And the other aspect of ensuring that we care for the carers, that's like so important. I think that the self-care aspect that Beth was mentioning as well is really, really important. And I think that this discussion is a very good segue into the next question, which is really about our educational institutions and how we can ensure that our youngest members of society are actually equipped with this empathy and compassion right from their childhood. Because we see a lot of this apathy being out there at this very like kind of individualistic me kind of mindset where it's like, it's not affecting me, so why should I care kind of my kind of outlook. And that's really, really harmful for our world. So we have seen in our line of work the benefit of children knowing and about what's going on in the world, learning to care for others. So in what ways do you think that educational institutions, how can they incorporate empathy and compassion into their curricula to really teach our children, our youngest members of society, how they can help to create a more peaceful and sustainable world for all? So we'll start off with Beth. Over to you.
All right. Thank you very much. So our community, or the Loreto community, the one I primarily represent at the UN, was founded to educate girls on the Kentucky frontier in the early 1800s in this country. And I wish I could say we were doing holistic education from the very beginning. We were doing more holistic education than some other places. And because at that point, we were still both planting and growing all our own food ourselves, that was some connection with Earth and a more intimate relationship with Earth. But of course, that backed away over the years, as in much of Christianity. And so now we're in a space where we're just now reconnecting with the land and the other creatures at our mother house in Kentucky, learning how to do education in new ways of ourselves and those we work with. And our schools are also part of that re-education, but it's coming along a bit more slowly than I would like. Although our school in El Paso, Texas, does want to investigate permaculture or permanent agriculture, which is a wonderful design system to make their campus more integrated with their bioregion. So that's wonderful. But there's a place in New Jersey I wanted to mention to everyone. It's called the Ridge and Valley Charter School. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of it, but they are doing a wonderful job of integrating the latest science that we know about the beginnings of the universe and letting that be spiritual as well. And from elementary school on up, they're integrating that with also some Montessori techniques. They're very student-centered and just allowing students to have the universe, have Earth as their classroom, as well as learning from each other, as well as learning from the teacher. So it's a very holistic perspective. And to me, that's one of the best examples I've seen of integrating empathy and compassion into the educational system. So thank you for the opportunity to lift that up.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. And yeah, it's like we want to be able to know more about the best practices that are currently being implemented. And it's just so wonderful to see that it is happening. It's not something that's just an abstract idea out there that educate our children about with empathy and compassion. It is happening. It's happening all around the world. We are all working to implement that within our own spheres of influence. I'm really glad that you were able to share that with us today and focus on the educational intersection as well. Thank you, Beth. Nathan, over to you.
Thank you. In my thought, the educational system has to move itself from a very structural, localized approach to a global, inclusive understanding, right? Very early on, we need to bring that perspective that this is not just what I need to know. Like many cultures around the world, many educational systems is like starts with the local geography, local language, local areas. And I understand that child's mind is not ready to absorb that the world is that large and cannot even manifest that there is a world with thousands of languages and different types of peoples and everything. But at the same time, in today's technology and world, they're already being exposed to. So the understanding of that has to be our mainstream education and cannot be a phased approach that it will come later sometime. So we need to look at education not as like, oh, when the child is 12, 13, we'll expose him or her to world history or the geography of the world or the types of people that live or choices that they can make about things. We need to start early on. That is one thing I believe has to happen. And the second thing that I have witnessed, I was invited about 2 years ago or 3 years ago to London by Bhai Mohinder Singh and his Guru Nanak Nishkam Seva Sangh Jatha. And in their meetings there, I realized that they have integrated this whole concept of peace, charter, and reconciliation in various educational units throughout Birmingham and all of United Kingdom and in various schools. And it was so interesting to see that there are letters being written by 5-year-olds and 6-year-old children to Mr. Putin asking to stop the war, right? So we may define that the understanding of reconciliation and peace is an adult issue, but they have trained the teachers to train these young minds to start reconciliation. And rather than saying to Mr. Putin, stop the war, they're asking for him to promote peace. Like that's how you reconcile, right? You don't reconcile with hatred, but you reconcile with love and you reconcile. So early on, our education systems can talk about this empathy, talk about this compassion, talk about that a child should respect everything around all life forms, the environment that he or she is growing into, the rivers, the waters, the land, the air, and not take these for granted, right? Because we are assuming that there is too much of pure air, too much of pure water, too much of everything. No, it is not. We all know that. And there are communities who are struggling to get a good quality air to breathe or a good quality of water to bathe every day. So wasting those waters in our bathrooms cannot be our element of learning by going to the grassroots level at some mid-school or a high school program where kids go to different countries. We need to educate them earlier. So the education system has to move from a structural approach of somewhere somebody said, this is how a child mind is developed, so let's teach them this way. I think so the child mind is a sponge, right? So the more you can throw into it, the more they're ready to absorb. And the diversity of information we can give them, the more they will absorb. And that change needs to come in our education system throughout the world. And that could be a total different approach to life then.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for sharing that with us, Nathan. Yes, absolutely. It's absolutely a sponge, the children's minds. And we've seen that in the work that we do as well. I remember when we were working in the Rohingya refugee camps in the Bangladesh-Myanmar border, the children there, a lot of them, because of the displacement, had never actually gained access to education to like read and write, but they could draw. And remember, they'd drawn these beautiful cards wishing, sending best wishes for the new year to other children across the world. And the children that we worked with around the world responding to that because they have this just unlimited love in their hearts. And for people, adults, to think that, oh, when they grow up, they're going to learn about all of this and kind of restricting their learning. It's just, I think that is where a lot of the apathy then sets in, because you're kind of not showing them the world. You're not making use of the love that they have in their hearts for people and planet. And yes, I think that ensuring that there is a much wider net in terms of what they learn, like from a really young age, is a wonderful way to move forward. And if all of our educational systems actually understood that, I think we'd have many, many more empathetic business people, lawyers, doctors, engineers, or just people going about their daily lives. So thank you very much for sharing that. Steve, over to you.
Thanks so much. In thinking about this question, I thought a lot about like a supplementary question to this, and that like education teaches us to learn things, right? But how do we learn something that we don't know we need to learn, right? And so in that, like in Buddhism, we talk a lot about the mirror and the dust on the mirror, right? And so like we all intrinsically recognize that we can love each other, that we're interconnected, that we have the capacity for compassion, that we have the capacity for empathy. However, like the dust of the world that like is our conditioning, the systems to which it covers the mirror. So when you look at the mirror with dust on it, you no longer see your true nature. You only see your conditioning, right? And so it is our work to remove the dust so that you can once again peer into the mirror, right? And that is to say, it is our homework, whether as teachers of children or children themselves, to be exposed to things that help remove the dust, right? And so in this way, I think the way Tzu Chi works, we have 4 missions and 8 footprints. And in our third mission, it's a mission of education. And the whole like body of work centers around giving children and individuals the opportunity to have access to education. However, once we created our third mission of education, we quickly created the fourth mission, which was humanistic culture, because we recognized and realized that no matter how much education you get, if you don't have that sense of humanity, if you don't have the culture to appreciate and understand like your relationship to the rest of the world, no matter how smart you are, accomplished you are, you won't be of service to society, right? And so in this way, I really resonated with what Nitin was talking about in thinking about like helping expand the world through education, right? So education for global citizenship, allowing these youth to kind of gain access to that knowledge at a younger age is definitely something we resonate with very well. And so we do this in 2 primary ways. The first being experiential learning opportunities, right? So Tzu Chi runs recycling centers around the world. And in those recycling centers, we collect communities like refuse and trash, and then we clean it and then we repurpose it, right? And so for children who come in, they can do very simple things, whether that's washing the bottle caps off of the bottles and then coming to learn, wow, I can turn this thing that I perceived as trash into a treasure of materials, fabrics, what have you. And that mindset shift, I think, is what's powerful. It's not just the action. It's not just the fact that they got to serve their community and be in this recycling center and take a half day off school, right, to go and play in the recycling center. But it's the fact that now they have a new frame of reference, that one thing that they may have seen as trash that they would just discard on the floor because culturally that's just what we do, right? They see it as a treasure. This is something that has the potential to be salvaged, to be reclaimed. And then that infuses into the rest of our lives, right? How many people in our society view homelessness as a issue that is invisible, right? These are people who are no longer of use to society. We can discard them. That disposability and discardability is a mindset and culture issue, right? So we utilize these small little opportunities to shift our humanistic culture to get there, right? And then another way in which I think our educational systems can cultivate that sense of compassion is by showing our children how they can, through their own individual actions, help all sentient beings, right? So our schools are all plant-based, and we advocate for plant-based diets because we really believe that if we wish to speak about compassion, our actions should mirror that, right? To have a teacher who can exemplify empathy by listening to the needs of students, but then turn around and then go and in demand for like their own desire and for their own diet, eat animals, we found to be like in conflict in that ethos of wanting to cultivate compassion. So we're like, if we're going to do this, we're going to do it at the highest level, right? And model through our own behavior the expectations we call upon our students to have to transform their own sense of being, and then also the same thing that we do for ourselves, right? And so I think in this way, we're not only connecting with the land and connecting with all sentient beings, but we're showing that our lives don't have to be steeped in violence. They don't have to be steeped in individualism, but we can really be connected to this broader community.
Thank you very much, Steve. And I love the practicing what you preach aspect. Yeah, it's not just about, oh, you should do this and you should do this. And a lot of the ways that our educational systems act now is like literally that. And there's no empathy or compassion or human connection to that, but actually practicing what you preach and changing the mindsets of the children. So understanding that trash can be treasure as well. We see that, but we use trash for eco-fashion campaigns as well, art from waste. And it's the exact same kind of shift that we see literally happening in front of our eyes with the children. So it's really, really important to incorporate that into our educational system. So thank you for sharing that. Christine, over to you.
Thank you so much, Kekasha, for this very important question. As my fellow panelists have very rightly highlighted and demonstrated, education plays a foundational role in shaping the values, behaviors, actions, and decisions of our future and present leaders and citizens. If we want to create sustainable peace in the world, we must begin by embedding empathy and compassion into the education and formation of the youngest members of society. And based on the experience of Religions for Peace, I would like to share 3 key ways as to how educational systems can incorporate empathy and compassion into their curricula. Number 1 is fostering awareness and understanding of the self and the other or your neighbor. Before children can truly understand and empathize with others, they need to have an awareness and understanding of themselves and other people, which are the cornerstones of empathy. Schools, and including houses of worship, can implement programs that teach young people about awareness and understanding, as well as reconciliation and practical ways to find common ground amidst these differences. And through mindfulness practices, reflective exercises, and discussions about emotions, children can develop the skills that is needed to navigate their own feelings while building empathy and understanding for others. The commitments we make in our interfaith and intersectoral spaces can serve as models for fostering awareness and understanding. A key example is the pledge that Religions for Peace made at its 9th World Assembly, where over 600 diverse religious leaders united in a commitment to welcome the other and resist hostility toward vulnerable populations such as refugees, migrants, and stateless persons. Such commitments can be adapted for the educational curricula by teaching students the importance of empathy through real-world examples of religious and moral leadership in understanding ourselves and each other. Number 2 is creating safe spaces for intercultural and interfaith dialogue. One of the most effective ways to foster empathy is through exposure to diverse perspectives and experiences. Religions for Peace has been at the forefront of promoting interfaith and intercultural dialogue, especially among young people. In educational settings, introducing students to different cultures, religions, and worldviews helps break down stereotypes and fosters an understanding of our shared humanity. By incorporating curricula that encourage students to learn about other traditions, engage with diverse communities, and participate in cross-cultural, cross-faith exchanges, schools and houses of worship can instill the value of empathy from an early age. Religions for Peace, including through its interfaith youth networks, has facilitated youth-led initiatives that bring together students from different religious backgrounds to discuss common issues and also develop collaborative initiatives that address these common issues that all of us face. These initiatives have shown us that when young people can interact and build relationships with others who hold different or perceived to be different beliefs, they not only learn empathy, but also develop the skills to bridge divides, which, as we know, are critical to sustaining peace in today's world. And lastly, service learning and social responsibility. Empathy is most powerfully cultivated through action. Educational systems can incorporate service learning into their curricula, allowing students to engage directly with communities in need. This hands-on approach helps young people develop compassion by witnessing and experiencing firsthand the challenges that others face. Service projects can range from local community cleanups to volunteering with marginalized groups, or even participating in environmental conservation efforts. When young people see the positive change and impact that they can have through service, they begin to understand that empathy is not just an emotional response, but a shared responsibility that compels us to act. And this type of learning reinforces the idea that they do play a critical role in creating a more peaceful and just world, starting with their immediate communities, which will then expand into the rest of society. In addition to these methods, it is essential that educators, including religious and faith leaders, also receive training in empathy and compassion themselves. Educators serve as role models, and when they demonstrate empathy and compassion in their interactions with students, they also create a learning environment that is conducive to and also rooted in kindness and mutual respect. Religions for Peace has supported initiatives that provide educators with tools and skills to lead with empathy, particularly in areas that are impacted by conflict. We've seen how this training not only transforms classrooms and houses of worship, but also creates very important ripple effects in broader communities and the rest of our globe. And lastly, we must also recognize the role of values-based education. We promote the idea that education must go beyond academic achievement and technical skills to emphasize the moral and ethical development of young people. Compassion, empathy, and kindness are not just soft values, but essential competencies and skills for building a peaceful world. And by integrating them into the education system, we can then ensure that students are equipped not only to succeed professionally, but also to contribute meaningfully and positively to a peaceful society. And so empathy and compassion should be at the heart of every educational experience, may it be in the classroom or houses of worship or any space where education occurs. When we teach our children to create understanding for others and to understand the world from diverse perspectives, we are investing in a future where sustainable peace is possible. And ultimately, we are investing in the flourishing of current and future generations. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Christine. We are investing in our current and future generations in that way. And I think there is an urgent need to redefine what success means, especially with our educational systems. We're often taught that it's okay, it's how much money you earn or what job you get, but very rarely is it about what kind of a person are you? How are you helping your community? How are you helping your environment? What is your conscience telling you about, what impact is this action going to have? So like that is that the redefinition, as you were talking about, that our educational systems play a very important role. So thank you very much for sharing that. I see that we do have our panelist, Hawa Diallo, joining us online. So glad that you could join us, Hawa. And I shall now pass the floor over to you to share your insights on the topic at hand, on empathy and compassion, using that to build a more peaceful future, how you've seen that reflected in your work, and how you think we can move ahead, move forward as we try to build this more peaceful future for all. So over to you, Hawa.
Thank you so much, everybody, and thank you for your accommodation. As you know, it's such a busy time right now with the UN, with the Summit of the Future. I find myself in so many different places, but there's no way that I could not be part of this panel. And I'm grateful that we have the opportunity to have, a hybrid session. So thanks again for that, Steve. I was listening a bit, to what everybody was saying. And I know that when I looked at the title of the panel, I loved like all the words compassion, empathy, peaceful, peaceful in the future. And then the one thing that I kept thinking about is like, okay, where's the love? And I heard one of our other panelists kind of integrate the importance of having love and also kindness. And these are things that I, think about also. And when I was thinking about the panel, I also, really just resonating with I should say aligning what everybody has said, because it's resonated with me, making sure that compassion and empathy, kindness and love are integrated as early as possible in our educational system. And then I just was thinking, okay, for me, I love working with the younger generations, but also across generations. And having had the opportunity of spending time with my mom, who's now 89, really taking care of her the last couple of years, I'm also seeing the importance of tapping into the value systems of the elder. I think a lot of what drives me is what I have gotten from my mom over the years and in her, older years right now. The compassion that I see that she has and the empathy that she has. And it's made me kind of take a look at myself from a personal perspective, but also from a work perspective. And for me, it seems like my love, the kindness I have for humanity, not getting choked up as I talk, so bear with me. And the empathy that I feel for other people drives my compassion. And that compassion drives me to act, in the right way, in a purposeful way, in a peaceful way. And I try to do that a lot in my personal life, but I've tried my best to do my work also that way. 38 years at the United Nations has not been easy. It's a great place to be, but it's not an easy place to navigate. And navigating policies and treaties and documents and rooms and all sort of people from all around the world is not easy. I've had the opportunity really to to hone my skills when it comes to empathy and compassion, because I like what our other speaker said, that empathy and compassion, these are not just principles, they're skills. They're tools that you can use to really put things into action. And when we're talking about, the global world, and we're talking about the Sustainable Development Goals, or all the things we're discussing in the Summit of the Future or the General Assembly, you need that empathy that fuels your compassion to take action in conflict resolution, in making right decisions, not only for policies, but for me also with the people who I work with. Empathizing and understanding different people's perspectives before I make a decision, whether it's, a job decision or even planning an event sometimes. I'm looking at, my beneficiaries, trying to understand who is, Howard Diallo trying to impact and to serve as an international civil servant. And that is what has really driven me and giving me a keen understanding of what my role is as an individual, in my family, in my community, but also as a worker, as an international civil servant. And it's especially important for me now that I've retired from the UN and I've jumped into civil society and I'm working at the grassroots level. It's important for me to go in not thinking I have all the ideas, all the questions, all the answers, but really working at that local level and really, I guess, in a sense, making myself vulnerable to understand other people's perspectives and insights. And that's what I could say. I always try to look at things from a personal perspective, whether it's at home or it's at work. And for me, I always say to be a good international civil servant anywhere, you have to have empathy. You have to have compassion. And I'll also throw, you have to have some spirituality also that guides and propels you to making those right policies, decisions that support the work that we do in our hope of impacting the world in a peaceful way. I think I'll stop here because I've heard a lot of good things. I'm just really echoing what everybody has said and thanking Kikoshan again and Steve for giving me the opportunity to join you online. Over to you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Helen. You're so glad that you could join us, albeit virtually. Would have loved to see you in person, but we absolutely understand that you had to join us virtually today. And thank you so much for sharing your insights. And I love the fact that you said that you need the empathy and the compassion to be a good civil servant. Very often when we talk about empathy and compassion, we often just put it even in these highest levels of policymaking, it's seen as something associated more with the grassroots, with the at the community level. But honestly, no matter what sector you're working in, whether that's as a civil servant or whether that's in the private sector or like wherever you are, you need that empathy and the compassion to be able to just be a good human being, because even your job, that's supposed to be benefiting humanity as well, right? So you need to be able to understand what impact your actions have on people and planet. So thank you very much for sharing that with us today. I will now open the floor for any questions that our audience in person or virtual might have. Any questions? While we wait for questions from the audience, I feel like how I am you mentioning the empathy being important for a civil servant. I think that, we have the Summit of the Future that's going on right now. We have world leaders gathered here. It's literally the highest levels of policymaking that's happening in front of our eyes. So how do you think, this is to all of our panelists, how can we move forward now? What's the way forward? We have the Pact for the Future that was adopted, but how can we make sure that it's not just another document, that we actually work to do something to make it a reality? So what are your ideas in this regard? And how can documents or spaces like this actually help to facilitate that or push forward implementation of empathy and compassion and put those into action? So, Steve, why don't we start with you?
Kakachan sees me head bobbing and I'm like, yeah, let's go. So I love it because the way forward, I think, is one of empathy and compassion, right? Like the document speaks of a future, and it's not the future, but a future, right? And I think that's one of those framing things that, like, in order to build the future, we have to come together. And in coming together, I think there's some things we can do right now in order to cultivate more of that sense of peace, so that as we take actions, we don't perpetrate traumas, that we don't replicate systems of harm that have gotten us to this place in space, right? And so the first one is like the difference between a scarcity framework and an abundance framework, right? And how often we operate out of a sense of urgency and a space of scarcity, right? One of the most exciting things about the Summit of the Future process has been its consultations with civil society, right? And being open to the idea that we as the UN, in wanting to create our future of multilateral frameworks and systems, want civil society to come in and comment, right? And this is one of those moments where we're exemplifying that, like, it's by building this big tent, it's by listening that we're able to kind of move forward. And so I think we go from that sense of the decision has to be one made within a small room to being a space of we can be abundant about the inputs because it's within the masses that we find the wisdom, right? And in the same way, I think as we move forward in implementing, recognizing that everything is so urgent, we also need to carry that same mindset, right? We can't move to implement the Pact of the Future with a scarcity mindset. That would mean shutting out actors. It would mean closing the table, not drawing up more seats to be able to meet with those in power, recognizing that to really move this work in the waves that it needs to be, it's a whole mobilization, right? And so shifting ourselves towards that abundance space. But in order to do that, I think we need to say, yes, our crises are urgent. Yes, there's a multiplicity of challenges. However, we need to get this right in order to move, right? And so to really take the coalition building that we've already done and really double down on that, right? And expand that tent even more so to celebrate the successes that we find. I think similarly in speaking to process, it's also about speaking about inner and outer peace, right? We want to achieve the outer peace. We want to be more empathetic and to be more compassionate. But if we try to do that work from a space of turmoil, we can't get there, right? We'll just be like blindly storming forward. And so to take the time and to have that grace for ourselves, to take the time we need to find that inner peace, to do the work, to build the outer peace, I think is so important. Otherwise, we just risk harming ourselves and those around us in the name of progress. And I think finally, in closing, it's, I think from Tsuji's framework, we often talk about like the importance of process, right? It's not enough just to care and help the people that we're caring for. They need to feel loved, right? They need to feel empowered and to be able to say, I feel the love and care that you've given me, and I wish to help others as well, right? So we can't just go in, whether it's like humanitarian development work, and say, we want to do something good for you, right? It first begins with listening and saying, we want to help you, but we need to listen to you, right? And to like really platform those voices who are the most vulnerable. And in that way, I think we, through a process, create the outcome, right? And we create that progress. And so similarly for the Pact for the Future, and for the whole of the Summit of the Future, recognizing this is but a rest stop on our journey towards flourishing, like we really need to look at like our process. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Steve. Beth, over to you.
So just to follow up, Steve, on your themes of abundance with urgency, because we are in a moment of urgency, especially in terms of climate, especially in terms of political will. Or maybe I heard a quote, I think it was from Ban Ki-moon, who said, our crisis is not one of political will, it's a lack of global solidarity. And so in the hopes of global solidarity, I wanted to lift up a few other educational systems or perspectives that we could be using to help integrate ourselves and those listening skills to both each other and to Earth. And the first, of course, would be the work of the Dalai Lama, right? And his work around social emotional learning, doing that work, and of course, his ability to connect with all the species of life. I do believe it was the Dalai Lama who said, if you think one person is not effective, you have never spent a night in bed with a mosquito, right? And then also something called, any type of circle work. The most popular one is called the Circle Way, or a leader in every chair. And then the work recently by Riane Eisler, right? She's most famously known for some of her feminist work, the book, The Chalice and the Blade, but she also does wonderful work on educational systems and how we empower every child. And so there are lots of wonderful systems out there, in addition, of course, to Waldorf education, Montessori education, systems of education that are much more holistic and student-centered than what I was certainly raised with in this particular country, in this particular culture. And I was just speaking this morning to a global pediatrics class of nurses about to graduate at NYU. And we were all kind of collectively lamenting that we had not learned about the UN or the Sustainable Development Goals in our educational systems here in the US. And I was able to tell them we're an anomaly here in this country. Other countries know about this. I think Bulgaria, the country of Bulgaria, within 2 years of the SDGs being passed, they had it integrated into their entire K-12 educational system. So really, if you can get the feeling of empathy and compassion and global solidarity, the political will follow and the integration will happen. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Beth. Hawa, do you have any insights on this question?
Yes. So did I unmute myself? Technology. Can you guys hear me? Yes? Can you hear me?
Coming in loud and clear.
Am I audible now?
Yes.
Yes. So sorry about that. Technology. is not my friend always. No, for me, I guess I keep thinking now it's the day after the summit. And I'm putting on my different hat, not being at the UN. So what does that mean for people? What does that mean for us? That, I get everything that's been put in the pact, and I love what Steve was saying. It's not the future, but a future. So my question now to world leaders and to us in civil society is, how do we locally adapt this? How do we get it going? And I think the speaker before me kind of, mentioned a bit of the global solidarity, but that's what's more of concern to me. And that's what jumping into civil society is what's making me not sleep at night. Because I think that I understand everything that's being done on the world stage. But then I ask myself, how does this document impact my cousin, Memunatu, in the village that has 5 kids, who has not been privileged enough to have a quality education and exposed and have the access that I have had? So that's what I'm calling on all of us, brothers and sisters in civil society. How do we get this going at the local and at the grass levels? That I want to see things being discussed at the UN and agreed upon out of conference room 4, 5, 6 in the General Assembly. And how do we operationalize it? I don't dare say I have the answers. I'm looking for collaboration. I'm looking for partnership. I'm looking from the know-how and to learn from everyone else and to share the little that I have learned over the years. So that's kind of what's bubbling in my head. Over to you, Steve.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Hawa, for sharing the insight. And absolutely, we implementing it. It's not just about, okay, it's a document and that's the end all and be all. It's about how we actually implement it on the ground. So thank you very much for sharing that. Let's see. Christine, over to you.
Thank you so much. It's been wonderful to hear from my fellow panelists. I believe that as we look towards the future, it's also necessary to take practical steps to acknowledge and heal from the past, because certain communities, a lot of communities across the globe are still healing from the past. And when at Religions for Peace, when we talk about shared human flourishing, one of the necessary steps to that is fostering forgiveness and reconciliation. And personally, one thing that I have seen through this work is it's easy to speak about forgiveness and reconciliation, but when we reflect on ongoing, long-standing conflicts across the globe, it's very difficult. It's a very difficult process to go through. When we reflect on deep-seated systemic inequalities that certain communities face across the globe, we start to think, how does one even begin to forgive when all of these experiences have exposed them and have forced them to undergo vulnerabilities that they are still undergoing to this day? So I think as we look towards the future and build towards the future, one thing that will definitely lay a foundation for a peaceful future and for sustainable peace is to do the work and take the necessary steps for these members of our communities to be able to heal from the past, and also for leaders and certain sectors and groups of society to also acknowledge and reflect on certain mistakes and actions and decisions that have caused vulnerabilities to certain members of society. And that will definitely lay the foundations for not only a peaceful future, but also for the necessary healing that is needed for a peaceful future. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Christine. Nitin, over to you.
Thank you, everybody. What an amazing thought process. From my perspective, the future calls for a deep, deep trust and belief and hope, right? All is not lost. This is not the end. This is not the doomsday. The resilience of human life will find a solution, right? And to find that solution, we have to heal from the past, as you said, Christine. the reconciliation, the forgiveness aspect of it has to come. And the forgiveness will not come from forgetting or just saying, oh, past was past, but learning from it as to why did it happen and how can we prevent it in future. And to do that, it would require all of us to respect each other, right? So the hope will drive us to learn, learning will drive us to respect each other. And in that process, we will not be judgmental and non-inclusive, but we will be encompassing every idea. No idea is bad. Everything needs to be written down. Everything needs to be reviewed. And even if one marginalized community feels different, it is our duty as leaders, as individuals, to not ignore them and not marginalize them further, but to bring them included into the discussion. And together, there is solutions for everything, right? I never believed that we cannot find a solution to where we are. We have found solutions for lifetimes and lifetimes, for centuries. So this is no new thing. And that this time, I think so many of the problems are created by us, right? So if we are the creators of our own problems and not that something happened that has changed the world, then we can solve for them. And it will require us to believe in amongst ourselves and to learn from the past and to respect everybody. I think that will carry us into the future that we are designing. Yes.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Nitin, for sharing that. I see that we're almost at time. So any further questions from, yes, our audience? Yes, please go ahead.
How do you think that technology might help to foster or facilitate compassionate love? I grew up in the church. There was a community that I had to go to Wednesday, Saturday, Sunday, Friday, always with the community. Now we have more isolation, more little bubbles in our neighborhood. But what do you think might be the benefits or some ideas of how technology can foster compassionate love?
Amazing. Thank you for your question. Over to the panel.
I think so technology is a game changer. It will do it. The challenge with technology is that because it is such a new toy, we just have like infested it. I used to choose the word infested with millions and millions of bytes and data points and everything, right? So coming from a college student in 95, 96, when the web was just getting made up and we would search for a word, right? At that time, we would get like 100 hits or something, and we would like think about this is too much, but yet we were able to sieve through the information. Now you type a word in Google and there are billions of hits, right? So the technology has not become a facilitator, but just a library with millions of books where no one wants to look at anything, right? And then through that process, today, if you go and search anything on Google, the artificial intelligence summarizes something and puts it up at the very top, which seems to be nice, right? But then now there is competition amongst AI itself to be the best AI, right? There is nothing that will replace the human, right? I don't believe that, and I can't. For us, technology is going to help us. It cannot lead us. It cannot design what we want to think, right? And when we do that, we have to use technology in its very creative, limited exposure, supporting us and not driving us. And those choices we have to teach because we have not taught those choices. We are teaching people to just say, Google it, find the first best 5 answers, and that's the answer you have to put. No, now think about, is this the right answer that I was trying to look for, right? And is technology really right in telling me what this means, or do I need to research further? And that intrinsic human value of constantly trying to explore cannot be killed in a human spirit. And that's what technology should be stopped from doing. It should continue to say, kindly explore further. And that's what it has to do. Thank you.
Love that. Thank you very much, Nitin. That's
Great point. You're right. I totally agree with you that technology is a game changer. It's with us, it's not going away, and we need to have it serve the human rather than us humans serving technology. We need to pay very close attention to the ecological aspects of technology and how much energy is being spent just to hold the data, right? The data centers, they're talking about reopening a nuclear power plant in my home state of Pennsylvania, 3 Mile Island, that had huge leaks back in the 1970s and 80s. They're talking about reopening it just to get enough energy to supply data centers, right, in the state of Pennsylvania. That's worrisome for me at best. And I think it's very, very important to use the positive aspects of technology, the invention, for example, of Zoom, which during the pandemic was a real lifesaver for many of us because we could connect human to human, albeit in little square boxes, with each other, though, and we could stay in touch with each other. I sing with a choir here in New York, Lavender Light. It's the Black and people of all colors LGBTQ gospel choir. And while we never got together to make one of those fabulous song things that some choirs did online, we still met every single Monday night through the entire pandemic for mutual aid and support for each other. And psychologically, some people say that kept them alive and kept them going and kept them there. So let's use the positive aspects. And finally, let's regulate it. We need to have more policy around it. The way AI and tech in general is being used to recruit young girls, for example, for trafficking and prostitution, that needs to stop. That's happening right and left in this country and many other countries around the world, where traffickers are posing as women's shelters, right, to lure women in to human trafficking. We need to regulate that. We need to stop the bad actors, and we need to have some policy around it, which is why I'm grateful the UN is working on the Digital Compact. Yeah. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Beth. Would any of our other panels go ahead, Christine?
Thank you so much. And Beth, you actually started my thought. So because there is this lack of policy and regulations, especially with the rise of AI, I think it's important to have that conscious decision to interpret and frame technology as just a starting point, because it should not be the end. As we've seen in terms of misinformation and disinformation, it's very easy to see or look up a certain word or a certain event on Google, and it's very easy to just take what you see and end there. But I think it's important to have that conscious decision and intentional decision and desire to go beyond what you see from the internet and actually use that to connect with fellow human beings, and then learn from experiences of other people who have actually lived these events, who have actually encountered these experiences, and have real life experiences and learnings from these real world occurrences, and build your perceptions from there, but not to use technology as the end all be all. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Christine.
I think a lot about like the scariness of technology, and so I appreciate the question. There's a question that I often ask, which is like, what values guide the design of our technology, right? And like, because technology can serve as a distraction, it can serve as a tool. And how do we like move it towards being a tool? It's what are those foundational values that are like rooted in it, right? Is technology being created to facilitate the exchange of information, of knowledge, to increase wisdom, right? Is it there to help us connect with our peers, to mobilize action that's manifesting in the real world? Is it there to sell us a service, to extract from us, to sell our information to others, right? There's many differing schools of thought, right? And so to participate in society is to participate in technology. But I think the way in which we approach it really is how and what we value, right? And so for Tzu, what we value is like human connection, right? Like technology is a tool that allows us to connect with others, to inspire them so that they may have that sense of compassion within them, right? We run a 24-hour TV station that catalogs the work of our volunteers across 134 countries. What are they doing? How are they serving? What are the inspiring stories behind that, their service, and what is being learned, right? And in that way, our technology is helping others see like my individual actions can have rippling impacts, right? And I think that's a beautiful way to utilize technology, right? At the same time, we're utilizing technology to like bring together volunteers across generations, right? Through whether it's chat platforms or like apps and programs that we design ourselves to gamify the act of service, right? And then through that gamification, we intrigue and interest people who may not necessarily be like that interested in service, but they come because their friends are doing it. And it's a challenge now, and there's incentives and whatnot, right? But they're utilizing technology as a platform to do something that benefits the community. And in that way, I think technology is also very exciting, right? Where technology can be scary is when it becomes a facsimile of human connection, right? Where it tries to step in and say like, oh, like what we're seeing right now with AI chatbots, right? Where I don't need to have connection with friends, I have a fleet of AI friends, right? And it's one of those things where it's like, it's an evolution of like society capitalizing on the vulnerability of individuals. So instead of providing you resources so you can become connected to others, let's have you go further into your darkness and your shell by giving you these like platforms that are actually extracting and exploiting you, right? And in that way, I think the facsimile is what's scary. And so like when we think about community and we think about technology, my like guiding question would be like, what are the values that drive this design? And does this get me closer to connecting with real people in the real world to do real service? Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you, Steve. Hawa, is Hawa still with us?
I believe Hawa's left the panel. Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. No worries at all. But thank you very much to our amazing panelists for sharing your insights today on this really, really important topic. And, you know, it's not like with everything that you've said, I think it's very obvious that empathy and compassion is not just about have empathy or else. It's about really ensuring that people understand what is going on in different parts of the world with acts of service, with connecting with one another, understanding that we as human beings are part of nature. We're part of our community. We need to be able to connect with others, with other species, to really feel for others. It's not something that can just, we can just read about, or we see it and we're like, oh, okay, this is what we're supposed to feel. It's something that comes organically with these areas of connection. And I feel like every single one of you today has been able to espouse what empathy really looks like and feels like from the stories that you've shared. So I really wanted to thank each and every one of you for being here today, for speaking to this really, really important topic on how we can harness empathy and compassion to build a more peaceful future for all, one where no one's left behind, where everyone has a life of dignity. And it's just so important in this world where we have so many intersecting challenges. It's very easy to lose hope in situations like this where there's so much of turmoil going on. But I feel like today's panel is definitely one that gives us hope for the future, that shows us that it is possible to utilize our empathy and compassion and our human values to create a better future for all, one where we're not fighting with each other, but one where we have love and we have kindness, and one where we're all working together despite and in spite of all our differences to create this better future for all. And only once we're able to address this apathy, this lack of empathy, and this lack of compassion will we be able to be free of the ills that constrain us. So thank you very much for being with us here today, to our in-person and virtual audience. And thank you so much once again to our panelists. Have a wonderful day.